A poor student tutored a struggling classmate. The words echoed in Luke's mind as he stared at the assignment sheet, the irony of it all not lost on him. The university's peer tutoring program had matched him with Emma Reeves, the dean's daughter who drove a BMW to campus while he worked double shifts at the campus cafe just to afford textbooks. Yet here he was, expected to help her pass organic chemistry, while his own life was barely held together with coffee and determination. The late autumn wind cut through his thin jacket as Luke crossed the campus quad, dead leaves swirling around his worn boots. The library loomed ahead, warm light spilling from its windows, a sanctuary from the cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside, students with laptops worth more than his monthly rent typed away, their biggest concern the upcoming homecoming game. Luke adjusted his backpack, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. She was late. Of course she was. Luke checked his watch, a gift from his father before the accident, and sighed, his breath forming a small cloud in the cold study room. The library kept the thermostat low to save on heating costs. Luke had chosen this particular room for its privacy, not wanting an audience for what would surely be an exercise in frustration. He spread his notes across the table methodically, the pages worn from use, handwriting precise and economical. He couldn't afford to waste paper. When Emma finally entered, Luke nearly didn't recognize her. The image he'd constructed in his mind, designer clothes, perfect hair, entitled attitude, dissolved instantly. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles prominent beneath reddened eyes. Her clothes were expensive, yes, but rumpled as though she'd slept in them. Most striking was the look of defeat etched across her face. "You're Luke?" Her voice was barely audible, nothing like the confident sorority girl he'd expected. He nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "And you're late." A flash of something, hurt perhaps or embarrassment, crossed her face. "I'm sorry." She slumped into the chair, dropping her pristine textbook on the table. "I had to meet with Dr. Harris about my last exam." Luke felt a twinge of guilt for his coldness. "That bad?" 38%. Her voice cracked on the number, and she blinked rapidly. I can't fail this class." "Not again." Again. The word hung between them, heavy with implications. Luke had assumed this was another case of a privileged kid not bothering to study, but the raw desperation in her voice told a different story. "Well," he said softer now, "that's why I'm here. Let's see where you're getting stuck." That first session stretched from the planned hour into 3. Luke was surprised to discover Emma wasn't lazy. She was working harder than almost anyone he knew. She'd reread chapters multiple times, attended every lecture, made flashcards, watched tutorial videos, yet the material remained just beyond her grasp, like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. "It's like everyone else got a manual, I didn't," she admitted, frustration coloring her cheeks pink. "The professor says something, and everyone nods like it makes perfect sense, but my brain just, freezes." Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through her notes, meticulous but filled with fundamental misconceptions. Luke recognized something in her struggle that resonated with his own life, working twice as hard for half the result. He found himself explaining concepts differently, not just repeating the textbook, but creating analogies, drawing diagrams, finding ways to make organic chemistry relate to everyday life. When she finally grasped the mechanism for a particular reaction, her entire face transformed. The smile that broke across her features was like sunrise after the longest night. Sudden, beautiful, illuminating. "That's it? That's all it is?" She laughed, the sound tinged with both relief and lingering disbelief. Why couldn't anyone explain it like that before? Luke shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Sometimes you just need a different perspective." As they packed up, Emma hesitated. "Same time Thursday?" Luke nodded, already calculating how he'd need to shift his work hours. The tutoring stipend was modest but necessary. What he hadn't counted on was finding the session surprisingly fulfilling. "Thanks," she said, lingering by the door. "Most people just assume I'm not trying hard enough." The statement hung in the air between them, a quiet confession that stirred something unexpected in Luke's chest. Recognition. "Yeah," he replied simply. "I know the feeling. Sonarm." 3 weeks into their tutoring arrangement, Luke began to notice the patterns in Emma's learning, how she struggled with spatial concepts but excelled at memorization, how her confidence crumbled with each small mistake, how she chewed her lower lip raw during practice problems. He adjusted his teaching accordingly, building scaffolds where she needed support, challenging her where she needed confidence. Emma noticed things about Luke too, how he always sat with his back to the wall, how he stretched his meals across days, how he flinched at unexpected movements. Neither mentioned these observations aloud, but a quiet understanding grew between them, fertilized by shared silence and occasional glimpses into each other's lives. "You're getting better," Luke said one evening as Emma correctly identified 5 reaction mechanisms in a row. "That last one trips up most of the class." She beamed, a flush of pride coloring her cheeks. The transformation in those moments, from hesitation to confidence, was becoming addictive to witness. Luke found himself looking forward to their sessions, to the small victories that lit her face like embers catching flame. "I have a confession," Emma said suddenly, setting down her pencil. "I switched tutors 3 times before they assigned me to you." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Problem student, huh? Problem tutors," she corrected. "They all just repeated the textbook at me. Like hearing the same incomprehensible explanation in a different voice would somehow make it click." She met his eyes directly. "You're the first person who actually tried to understand how I learn." The compliment made Luke uncomfortable, not because it wasn't welcome, but because it was. He'd been careful to maintain distance, to remember this was a job, not a friendship. Emma Reeves lived in a different world than his. When the semester ended, she would return to her BMW and her sorority house, and he would pick up extra shifts to cover next semester's books. "It's getting late," he said, deflecting. "Library closes soon." Emma glanced at her watch. Slim, gold, probably worth more than Luke's entire wardrobe, and frowned. "We didn't finish the practice problems. Next time. I have an exam on Tuesday." Worry creased her brow. "Could we maybe meet over the weekend? I can pay extra." The offer stung more than it should have. "I have work on Saturday. Sunday morning is all I can do." "That would be amazing." "Thank you." Her gratitude was genuine, making it harder to maintain his professional distance. "Where should we meet?" "The library's closed on Sundays." Luke hesitated. The campus coffee shop would be packed with students nursing hangovers and cramming for Monday exams. His shared apartment was out of the question. Too small, too personal, too revealing of his circumstances. "There's a diner on Mason Street," he suggested finally. "Walking distance from campus. Good coffee, quiet enough to study." Emma nodded, relief visible in the loosening of her shoulders. "Mason Street Diner. Sunday at 9? 8, Luke corrected. "I have a shift at noon." Only after she left did Luke realize he'd suggested Mabel's, the diner where his mother had waitressed for 15 years, where the owner still slipped him free meals when business was slow, where the staff knew exactly why he was working his way through college instead of enjoying it like his peers. He'd just invited Emma Reeves into a piece of his real life, and he wasn't entirely sure why. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth, a brief respite before winter fully claimed the city. Luke arrived at Mabel's 20 minutes early, choosing a booth in the back corner where the vinyl was less cracked, the table more stable. Flo, his mother's old friend, brought him coffee without asking. "Studying again?" She clucked her tongue in disapproval that couldn't hide her pride. "Your mama would be busting her buttons to see you now." "Thanks, Flo." Luke accepted the coffee gratefully, the ceramic mug warming his perpetually cold hands. "I'm actually meeting someone. A student I'm tutoring." Flo's eyebrows shot up, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. "A girl student?" "It's not like that," Luke said quickly, too quickly. "She's struggling with organic chemistry." Flo's expression made it clear she wasn't convinced. "Well, your student just walked in looking lost as a duck in the desert." Luke looked up to see Emma standing in the doorway, scanning the diner uncertainly. She was dressed more casually than he'd ever seen her. Jeans, a simple sweater, hair in a loose braid. Without the trappings of campus life, she looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. When she spotted him, her face brightened with relief. "Sorry I'm early," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I wasn't sure how long it would take to walk here." "You walked?" The question slipped out before Luke could stop it. Emma nodded, unwinding a scarf from her neck. "It's a beautiful morning. Besides, my car's in the shop." Before Luke could respond, Flo appeared at the table with another mug of coffee and a knowing wink that made Luke want to disappear into the cracked vinyl seat. "What can I get you, honey?" Flo asked Emma. "Sunday specials blueberry pancakes. Luke's favorite since he was knee-high." Emma glanced at Luke, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Is that a recommendation?" Caught between embarrassment and something warmer, Luke shrugged. Now they're decent. High praise from this one, Flo stage whispered to Emma. Pancakes it is then. Free for both of you? Luke started to protest. The tutoring stipend didn't stretch to diner breakfast, but Emma was already nodding. My treat, she said to Luke. Least I can do for taking up your Sunday. Normally, Luke would refuse on principle. He didn't take charity, didn't need pity, but something in Emma's expression, earnest, without condescension, made the words die in his throat. He nodded once, sharply, and pulled out his notes. The study session that followed was different from their library meetings. With no closing time looming, no fluorescent lights humming overhead, they fell into a rhythm more relaxed than before. Emma asked questions she might have been too embarrassed to voice in the academic setting. Luke found himself sharing tricks and mnemonics he'd developed for himself. How do you remember all this? Emma asked during a break, gesturing at the complex mechanisms he'd explained without referencing notes. You make it look so easy. Luke stared down at his empty plate, tracing a droplet of syrup with his fork. It's not easy. Not for me, at least. He hesitated, then added quietly, I have to work twice as hard because I can't afford to fail. There's no safety net, no second chances. The confession hung between them, more personal than anything he'd shared before. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her coffee cooling untouched. Everyone thinks I have it made, she finally said, her voice barely audible above the diner's ambient noise. Dean's daughter, trust fund, perfect life. They don't see the pressure. The expectations. She swallowed hard. My father's a brilliant man. So was his father. Excellence isn't celebrated in our family, it's required. And science doesn't come naturally to you, Luke guessed. Emma's laugh was brittle. Nothing academic comes naturally to me. I was tested for learning disabilities in high school, but my father refused to accept the results. Said I just needed to apply myself. She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. 4 years of college and I'm still trying to prove I belong here. Luke recognized the weight she carried. Different from his, but heavy nonetheless. Is that why medicine? To prove something? I wanted to be a writer, she admitted. But that wasn't an option in my family. Doctor, lawyer, professor, those were the choices. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. What about you? Humar? Why chemistry? The question caught Luke off guard. Few people asked about his dreams rather than his circumstances. It makes sense to me, he said simply. There are rules. Patterns. When everything else is chaos, chemistry is reliable. Emma smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. That's the first time you've sounded passionate about anything. Luke felt exposed, as though she'd glimpsed something he usually kept hidden. He redirected to safer ground. We should get back to electron transport chains before my shift. But something had shifted between them, a wall crumbling without either fully noticing its fall. As they worked through practice problems, the distance Luke had so carefully maintained began to feel artificial, a protective measure against a threat that might not exist. When they parted outside the diner, Emma impulsively hugged him, quick, catching them both by surprise. Thank you, she whispered, stepping back quickly. Not just for today. For seeing me. Luke stood frozen on the sidewalk long after she walked away, the ghost of her warmth lingering against his chest, wondering why his carefully constructed defenses were suddenly, alarmingly insufficient. Winter descended on campus with merciless intensity. Snow piled against buildings, wind howled through the quad, and students hurried between classes with hunched shoulders and hidden faces. Luke's thin jacket proved woefully inadequate. During their Thursday session, his fingers were so cold he could barely hold a pencil. Emma noticed, of course. She noticed everything about him these days. Here, she said, pulling something from her backpack. A pair of gloves, dark gray and obviously expensive. I got these for my brother, but they don't fit him. Luke stared at the offering. I can't. If your hands fall off from frostbite, who's going to explain acid-base equilibrium to me? Her tone was light, but her eyes were serious. Please, Luke. It's practical, not charity. After a long moment, he accepted the gloves. They fit perfectly, of course. He suspected there was no brother, but he couldn't bring himself to reject the kindness behind the lie. As finals approached, their sessions intensified. 2 hours became 3, 3 became 4. Sometimes they'd work until the library closed, then continue at the 24-hour coffee shop off campus. Luke rearranged shifts, Emma canceled social engagements. The urgency of finals provided convenient cover for the simple truth neither acknowledged. They'd become friends, maybe something more. Emma's improvement was remarkable. Her midterm grade had jumped to a B-. her confidence growing with each correct answer. Luke found himself teaching less and challenging more, watching with undisguised pride as she worked through problems that would have paralyzed her months earlier. "I think you're ready," he told her during their last scheduled session before finals. "You've covered everything that could possibly be on the exam." Emma looked up from her notes, uncertainty flickering across her features. What, what if I freeze up? What if I forget everything?" "You won't." The certainty in Luke's voice surprised even him. "You know this material, Emma. You've put in the work." She smiled, though anxiety still shadowed her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have." Luke closed her textbook gently. "You just needed to believe in yourself as much as I do." The words slipped out unintentionally, too honest, too revealing. A blush crept up Emma's neck, matching the warmth Luke felt in his own cheeks. For a moment, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Emma broke the tension first. "I got you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "An early Christmas gift." "Don't argue," she added as Luke began to protest. "It's nothing extravagant." Reluctantly, Luke accepted the package, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a book. Advanced Chemical Kinetics, Theoretical Approaches, and Real-World Applications. It was the companion text to the graduate-level course he hoped to take next year, assuming his scholarship continued. "How did you know?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. They'd never discussed his future academic plans. Emma's smile was soft. "You had the course catalog open once when I arrived." "The page was dog-eared." She shrugged. "I pay attention too." Luke ran his fingers over the book's cover, throat tight with emotion he couldn't express. No one had given him a gift in years, not counting Flo's occasional free pie. Certainly nothing so thoughtful, so perfectly aligned with his private ambitions. "Thank you." He managed finally, the words inadequate for the warmth expanding in his chest. "Merry Christmas, Luke." Emma gathered her things, hesitating briefly. "Good luck with your finals." "Not that you need it." "Good luck with yours," he replied. "You've got this, Emma." It felt like goodbye, though neither said the word. Their tutoring arrangement would officially end with the semester. Luke had already been assigned new students for January. There was no reason for their paths to cross again. They shared no classes, no social circles, no common ground outside this room and the knowledge they'd built together. As Emma reached the door, she turned back. "Will you be at the diner on Sunday?" "I thought maybe we could celebrate after finals." "My treat." Luke had picked up an extra Sunday shift. Holiday season meant extra tips, but found himself nodding anyway. "Noon?" Her smile was like breaking dawn. "I'll be there." After she left, Luke sat alone in the study room, new book cradled in his hands, fighting the uncomfortable realization that somewhere between organic chemistry mechanisms and late-night coffee, Emma Reeves had become important to him in ways that defied his careful boundaries. Sunday arrived, but Emma didn't. Luke waited at Mabel's for 2 hours, nursing cold coffee and ignoring Flo's sympathetic glances. When his phone finally buzzed with a text, it wasn't from Emma, but from his roommate. Water pipe had burst in their apartment building. Everything was flooded. He needed to come immediately. Luke left the diner with a hollow feeling that had nothing to do with the emergency awaiting him. Emma had changed her mind, or forgotten, or decided that with finals over, their connection was no longer necessary. He told himself it was better this way, cleaner. The semester was over. Life moved on. The water damage to his apartment was extensive. Most of his possessions were salvageable, but the building was uninhabitable. With winter break beginning, the university dorms were closing, leaving Luke effectively homeless during the coldest month of the year. He crashed on a co-worker's couch for a few nights, then arranged to sleep in the break room at the cafe where he worked, grateful for a manager who looked the other way. He didn't hear from Emma. He told himself he wasn't checking his phone for her name. Christmas Eve found Luke working a double shift at the cafe, the campus eerily empty, the tips meager. Snow fell steadily outside, beautiful and threatening at once. His plans for the holiday consisted of a frozen dinner and the advanced chemistry book, which he'd been too busy dealing with the housing crisis to open. "Last customer," his manager called as Luke wiped down the espresso machine. "Then we're closing early." Luke glanced up, a greeting dying on his lips as Emma walked through the door, cheeks flushed from the cold, snowflakes melting in her hair. She spotted him immediately, relief washing over her features. "You're here," she said, crossing to the counter. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Luke stared, unable to process her presence. "What are you doing here? I thought you'd be home for the holidays." I am." She pushed hair from her face nervously. I drove back this morning when I couldn't reach you. Your phone goes straight to voicemail, and your apartment manager said there'd been a flood. But he didn't know where you'd gone, and none of the libraries are open. And I thought maybe you'd be working. But I didn't know which cafe. So I've been to 4 already and... Emma, Luke interrupted her rambling. Breathe. She inhaled shakily. You didn't show up at the diner. I did. Luke's voice was carefully neutral. You didn't. Confusion crossed her face. What? No, I was there at noon exactly when we said... I waited for an hour. Sunday, Luke said. You said Sunday. Understanding dawned on Emma's face. Finals ended Friday. I meant that Sunday, 2 days after our last session. Oh, the simple misunderstanding shouldn't have felt so significant, but Luke felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. I thought that I stood you up. Emma shook her head. I wouldn't do that, Luke. Not to you. The manager cleared his throat from across the room. We're closing, folks. Take the reunion outside. Luke untied his apron. Just let me get my coat. In the back room, he gathered his things. The backpack containing everything he'd managed to save from the flood, including Emma's book. He hesitated, then pulled on the gloves she'd given him. Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming the campus into a silent, white dreamscape. Emma waited by the door, hands tucked into her coat pockets. When Luke emerged, she studied his face. Where are you staying tonight? The question caught him off guard. He considered lying, but found he didn't have the energy. Here, he admitted. My manager lets me use the break room until the dorms reopen. Emma's expression shifted from surprise to determination. No, you're not. It's Christmas Eve, Luke. You're coming home with me. To your family? The idea was absurd. I don't think... To my apartment, she clarified. My roommates are gone for the break. I have a perfectly good couch that no one is sleeping in. It's not charity, she added, using his own arguments against him. It's practical. And it's Christmas. Luke should have refused. It crossed too many lines, created complications he couldn't afford. But standing in the falling snow, Emma's invitation felt like more than an offer of shelter. It felt like permission to stop fighting so hard, just for one night. Okay, he said finally. Just for tonight. Emma's apartment was nothing like Luke had imagined. Instead of the luxury condo he'd pictured, it was a modest 3-bedroom in an older building, comfortably furnished but far from extravagant. Family photos crowded the walls. Emma with an older man who must be her father, a woman who shared her smile, a younger boy with the same honey blonde hair. It's not much, Emma said, misreading his surprise as disappointment. But it's home. It's nice, Luke said honestly. Comfortable. Emma showed him to the couch, which was already made up with sheets and blankets. I prepared it this morning. I was hoping I'd find you. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to articulate. Luke set his backpack down carefully. I should explain about the diner, Emma said, sitting on the edge of an armchair. I got there at noon, but you weren't there. I thought maybe you were running late, so I waited. When you didn't show up, I tried texting, but the messages wouldn't go through. It wasn't until I got home that I realized you must have thought I meant right after our last session. My phone died in the flood, Luke explained. I lost your number, and I had no idea where you lived. Emma shook her head ruefully. All that time studying together, and I realized I knew almost nothing practical about your life. I keep people at a distance, Luke admitted. It's safer that way. Is that why you looked so shocked when I came into the cafe? Did you think I just disappeared? Luke looked away, uncomfortable with his own transparency. The semester's over. The tutoring contract ended. There was no reason for you to... For me to what? Care? Emma moved from the armchair to sit beside him on the couch. Luke, you're more than just a tutor to me. I thought you knew that. The proximity was distracting, her honesty disarming. Luke struggled to maintain the emotional walls that had protected him for so long. I got my final grade, Emma said when he didn't respond. A minus. Professor Harris said it was the most remarkable improvement he'd seen in 20 years of teaching. Pride momentarily displaced Luke's discomfort. I knew you could do it. Because of you. Emma's voice was soft but insistent. Not just because you explained the material. Because you believed I could understand it when no one else did, including me. You did the work, Luke countered. You put in the hours. You wanted it, and now I want something else. Emma's directness was startling. I want to know you, Luke, not just as my tutor, as my friend. Maybe, she hesitated then pressed on. Maybe more than that. The admission hung between them, too honest to ignore, too important to dismiss. Luke felt the careful distance he'd maintained crumbling like sand against the tide. I'm not from your world, Emma. I'm not asking you to be. She reached for his hand, her touch warm against his perpetually cold skin. I'm asking for a chance to be part of yours. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing paths and boundaries, transforming the familiar into something new and unexplored. Inside, in the warm light of Emma's apartment, Luke felt something similar happening to the barriers he'd built around his heart. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. Emma's smile was gentle. Neither do I. But I think that's how all the best stories start. When she leaned forward, the kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Luke answered by drawing her closer, all his careful reasons for keeping distance falling away in the simple rightness of her in his arms. Later, as they sat on her tiny balcony, watching the snow transform the city, sharing histories and dreams and the small details that made up their separate lives, Luke realized he'd been tutoring himself as much as Emma, learning slowly, painfully, that connection wasn't always a liability, that vulnerability didn't always lead to loss. Merry Christmas, Luke, Emma whispered as midnight approached, her head resting against his shoulder. For the first time in years, Luke allowed himself to hope for more than mere survival. Merry Christmas, Emma. 10 years later, the hospital corridor was silent in the pre-dawn hours, the sort of hushed quiet that preceded the controlled chaos of daytime operations. Luke walked with the confidence of familiarity, nodding to the occasional nurse or resident who recognized him. Outside the door to Surgical Suite 3, he paused, watching through the observation window as his wife completed the intricate procedure that had brought them across the country on short notice. Emma's hands moved with practiced precision, her focus absolute as she navigated the microscopic world, visible only through the specialized equipment surrounding her. The patient on the table, a 6-year-old girl with a rare brain tumor, had been deemed inoperable by 3 separate surgical teams before Emma Reeves Jackson had been called in as a last resort. Luke checked his watch. The surgery was entering its 11th hour, but Emma showed no signs of fatigue. She had always had this capacity for endurance when it mattered most, whether studying for organic chemistry or pioneering surgical techniques that were revolutionizing pediatric neurosurgery. Dr. Jackson? Luke turned to find a young resident approaching, coffee in hand. That's for you, she explained. Dr. Subersumershorten, the Fronterwickerman. Reeves Jackson said you'd be here by now. Black with 1 sugar, right? Thank you. Luke accepted the coffee, touched by Emma's thoughtfulness, even in the midst of the most demanding surgery of her career. How's it going in there? The resident searched for words. It's like watching someone paint with lightning. I've never seen anything like it. That little girl was given a death sentence, and Dr. Reeves Jackson is just erasing it 1 millimeter at a time. Luke felt the familiar surge of pride that came with hearing others recognize what he'd always known about Emma. Her extraordinary capacity to overcome obstacles, to transform limitations into new pathways forward. The struggling student had become the teacher, the innovator, the miracle worker. She'll be finishing soon, the resident continued. She wanted me to tell you she'll meet you in her office afterward. Luke nodded, settling into the waiting area chair with his coffee and the latest draft of his research paper. As a professor of biochemistry at the university where Emma held her surgical fellowship, he'd arranged his schedule to accompany her on this emergency consultation. Their lives had become a carefully choreographed dance of academic calendars, surgical rotations, research deadlines, and the precious private moments they carved out in between. An hour later, Emma found him there, surgical cap still on her head, exhaustion and triumph battling for dominance in her expression. Hey, she said softly, dropping into the chair beside him. You didn't have to wait. Of course I did. Luke handed her the fresh coffee he'd procured in anticipation of her arrival. How is she? Stable. Better than stable. The tumor's gone. All of it. Emma's voice held the quiet wonder that still emerged after particularly successful surgeries. They said it couldn't be done without catastrophic damage. They were wrong. Luke squeezed her hand gently. They didn't have you. Emma leaned against his shoulder, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability now that the professional mask could be set aside. I was thinking about us in there, about where we started. Organic chemistry and tutoring sessions. Luke smiled at the memory. About having someone believe in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Emma looked up at him, fatigue softening her features. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they hadn't assigned me to you? Another tutor might have helped you pass. Maybe, Emma shook her head. But I wouldn't be here now. Not doing this. It was you, Luke. You showed me that understanding something wasn't about being naturally brilliant. It was about finding the right approach, the right perspective. You made me believe I could learn anything if I found the right way to learn it. The recognition humbled him. In the decades since their first meeting, he'd watched Emma transform from an uncertain student into one of the most innovative surgeons in the world, developing techniques that integrated her unique spatial thinking, once considered a limitation, into revolutionary approaches to inoperable tumors. That little girl will grow up because of you, Luke said softly. Not because of anything I did. Everything we become is built on who helps us along the way. Emma straightened, summoning energy from reserves only she could access. Let's go back to the hotel. I need about 12 hours of sleep before we meet with the medical team tomorrow. As they walked through the hospital corridors, a nurse stopped them, eyes wide with recognition. Dr. Sturiyurinon Shirinorum. Reeves Jackson? I just heard about the Patterson surgery. They're saying it's impossible, what you did in there. Emma smiled tiredly. Not impossible, just not obvious. Sometimes the solution is there all along. You just need someone to help you see it differently. Her hand found Luke's as they continued toward the exit, the simple gesture containing a decade of shared history. The poor student and the struggling classmate who had found in each other not just academic support, but the courage to become more than either had imagined possible alone. Outside, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of possibility. Emma paused to watch it, her expression peaceful despite her exhaustion. Worth the all-nighter? Luke asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Always. Emma leaned into his embrace. Some things are worth staying up for. In the growing light, Luke thought about the long, improbable journey that had brought them here. From a cold library study room to international medical conferences, from tutoring sessions to wedding vows, from two people hiding their vulnerabilities to partners who strengthened each other's gifts. They had built something neither could have created alone. You know what I'm thinking? Emma said as they resumed walking. That you're going to sleep for a week? She laughed softly. Besides that, I'm thinking about starting a foundation for students with learning differences who want to pursue medicine, special tutoring, adaptive technology, whatever they need. The Emma Reeves Jackson Foundation? Luke suggested. No. Emma stopped, turning to face him. The Second Chance Foundation. For all the kids who just need someone to believe they can do the impossible. Her eyes, despite the exhaustion, shone with purpose. What do you think? Luke thought about all the Emmas out there. Brilliant minds trapped by educational systems that couldn't recognize different ways of understanding, limited by assumptions about what intelligence looked like. He thought about all the Lukes, talented but isolated, guarding themselves against connection out of fear or necessity. I think, he said, kissing her forehead gently, that's exactly what the world needs. One second chance at a time. As they walked toward their future, Luke reflected on how the universe worked in patterns too complex to predict. How a poor student tutoring a struggling classmate had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately save countless lives. How sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest connections. And how love, like learning, simply requires finding the right teacher.